In this first section, I'm going to go over some of the syntax of Go, which you may already be familiar with, but there are various little bits of syntax that you may not have used, and I want to recap those. And also look into some of the areas like methods and interfaces where there's some depth that's worth recapping or going into as you may not have seen it before. So, to start with, I want to look at something very familiar, which is the for loop, and in particular the use of break and continue, and at the same time what happens with a switch statement. So, well, let's get rid of hello world. We don't need that program anymore, although we'll use it just to check that the environment is working. So let's just use go run, and yeah, okay, that looks like it's good. So the for loop. So the for loop syntax you are familiar with because you've been using Go for a while, I hope, and so the basic one is just a simple loop like this. And what I'm going to do is look at the use of break and continue. So break obviously gets you out of a loop, so you can use that keyword like this and it will drop you out of the loop completely. And continue will take you back to the beginning of the loop, so it's essentially a go-to to the beginning of the loop. Both of these can also be used with labels, in particular break. So if we wanted to break out of a particular loop when things were nested, we could actually name the loop. So we're going to say, my label, and then I could say break my label, which will take me out of that particular loop here. So let's just do a little example. Let's make ourselves something a bit more interesting. And I'm going to make a program that counts numbers, and it counts even and odd numbers. So let's go like this. I'm going to have some variables to count the number of even and odd numbers in my program. And I'm going to give myself a list of numbers. So I'm going to do like this. So just create a list. Let's just make something very silly like that. And I'm going to range over those numbers. So we're going to say numbers. Okay, there we go. Let's range over those numbers. Notice I've used the underscore here because I don't actually care about the index in here. I just care about the number n itself. And I'm going to go through and count. So I'm going to say if n %2 equals 0, i.e. it's even, then do that. And so we'll just do even plus equals 1, odd plus equals 1, and at the end just do a quick printf, even how many of those have we got, odd how many of those have we got, even odd. Let's just go run that. There you go. So there are 3 even numbers in there and there are 5 odds, so you can see the odds are in here and the evens here, so the evens are 2, 8 and 10. Alright, so that's a fairly simple program with a fairly simple loop. Now what we could do is we may decide there are some numbers we want to exclude. For example, let's not count 0 as even or odd. In fact, these don't need to be in order. Let's just shove it in somewhere else. Let's just say we decided that's something else that needs to be counted in a different way, and we're going to exclude it altogether and count it as if it wasn't a number. So I'm going to have a total number of numbers, and I'm going to put myself a little if n equals 0, continue. So it's going to go like that, and total, so add up those total number of numbers, and I'll just adjust this so we get a total here. So this continue here is just going to say if I've got 0, I'm not going to count it as even or odd. Let's just run that. There we go. So there's 9 numbers in total, and as you can see, 5 and 3 even and odds. So you obviously skipped the 0. Obviously you could do this a different way. You could come in here and you could say, you know what, do this. Let's just indent that, or you could count like this. That would give you the same result. But continue there is a handy way, especially if you've got a lot of logic you want to deal with. Now, another thing we could do is, let's suppose that finding 0 was a sort of marker in the list that said you had to stop. Then you could do something like this. Let's clean this up a bit. So that's going to count even and odd numbers until it hits 0, and it's going to break out of that loop. So there we go. There's only one even number before 0, and that's number 2 right here. And another thing you can do is you can label this loop so you could break out of it. So for example, we could do something very silly like go around this loop some number of times. Let's just do a classic thing. So we're going to go around this loop 10 times. Let's just do this. And we can specifically decide to give up when we find 0. So I'm going to say here abort. Let's call this abort. And if we find a 0, then we're going to give up immediately. So let's just run this guy. So that gave up immediately because it broke out of this loop. If there's no label on there, let's just run it like that. Sorry, good old Go. Tells me I missed something. It goes round 10 times. So that abort label allowed you to jump right out of the loop there and jump out of 2 levels of looping. So that can be useful if you have nested looping and you want to get out altogether. Let's just try one last thing. And that, you see, what that did was it continued up to here. So that actually jumped out of the loop and up to the loop above it. So with labels, break and abort allows you to jump around within loops. They're close to being a go-to and can be kind of useful, especially if you have some sort of condition where you want to do something. For example, one common thing is if you have, like, say, a debug mode where if a certain thing happens, you need to get out and terminate, you could use a break for that. Or maybe you have some mode where you wanted to do, let's say, counting of events, but not actually do the events, then you could use a continue to jump around in a loop. Useful if you want to sort of jump quickly. In general, if you're using a lot of them, I think it's a bad sign because your loop is going to be hard to understand. But at the beginning of the loop, where you want to either abort or jump again, go round and around the loop again without doing work, both break and continue can be super useful. Another place that break can be useful is in a switch statement, especially if the switch statement is rather complicated. And so you can get out of the switch, and you can even get out of a loop inside a switch by using break with a label. I'm going to demonstrate that by modifying the program that was used in the for section, which is counting even and odd numbers, to have a special case where it comes across a negative number and aborts. So first of all, let's have a look at that original thing. I've cleaned it up just slightly. As you can see, it's got a few different things going on in here, and this, when you've got a lot of ifs like this, it can actually be really useful to stop and say, hey, a switch statement is useful here, rather than having a long nested thing. So first of all, let's turn this into a switch, and then we'll work from there. So switch statement syntax is like this. So we've got these 3 cases, right? We've got this case where it's 0, we've got a case where it's even, and we've got the other case, and I'm going to use default for that. And so I'm just going to clean this stuff up here. So, okay, so there we've got a 3. So if we come across as 0, we come across an even number, or we come across something else. So we can just change that. So in this case, we're going to just add 1 to even. If it's not 0 or that, and it's like this. And I'm going to count zeros this time like this. So we'll do that. And let's just add this into here. And down the bottom here, let's put in the 0 count.